I am Mutsuhito, the second son of Emperor Meiji, who reigned Japan before me. I was raised to the throne when I was 15 years old and became the 122nd Emperor of Japan, who ruled the empire for 45 years, from 1867 to 1912. I am more commonly known as Emperor Meiji, a title I was granted posthumously, which characterizes some profound reforms executed by me that restored Japan's socio-cultural and political structure and turned it from an isolationist, agricultural state controlled by hundreds of semi-independent industrial feudal lords to a highly centralized world power with a rapidly growing industrial sector based on the latest technology of the time and a powerful army and navy. During my pro-reformist reign, Japan adopted a constitution and parliamentary system that caused the centuries-long shogunate to end by a bloody dispute called the Boshin War, and gradually abolished most of the privileges of the samurai, including their right to take a salary from the government. Moreover, around 2,300 kilometers of railroads were built, and telegraph lines in each city were installed. The success of the Meiji reforms and restorations term, which I idealized and fulfilled, proved itself observably in the First China-Japan War of 1894–95, which resulted in China's losing the port of Weihaiwei and requesting a peace treaty in February 1895, which meant a shift of power dominance in East Asia region from China to Japan for the first time. The Russo-Japanese War is another mind-changing victory of Japan, having embraced the Meiji reforms, which shocked and shook international observers and transformed the balance of power globally, both in Asia and Europe, causing Japan to emerge as one of the major global powers, while Russia to decline in terms of prestige and influence in Europe.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, tensions and conflicting interests between Russia and Japan escalated, ultimately leading to the Russo-Japanese War. During this period, Japan underwent a transformative process known as the Meiji Restoration. Following years of isolation, Japan sought to modernize its society and emulate Western powers. The Meiji government implemented political and economic reforms, including the abolition of feudalism, industrialization, and the development of a modern military. These efforts propelled Japan into a new era of influence and power. However, as Japan's aspirations grew, it found itself confronted with a powerful rival in the form of the Russian Empire. Russia had territorial ambitions in East Asia, particularly in Korea and Manchuria, which directly challenged Japan's regional dominance. Both countries sought to exploit the prevalent political instability in Korea to assert their influence. Japan's decision to challenge Russia was driven by several motivations. Firstly, Japan desired territorial expansion and access to resources to sustain its growing industrial base. Secondly, Japan aimed to establish itself as the dominant power in East Asia, asserting its influence over neighboring states. Lastly, Japan viewed Russian encroachments in Korea and Manchuria as a direct threat to its security. The build-up to war involved diplomatic negotiations and failed attempts at resolving their differences peacefully. Both sides made efforts to avoid direct conflict, but strained relations and conflicting interests hindered any resolution. Diplomatic efforts eventually broke down, leading to a military buildup from both Japan and Russia. Numerous key figures played pivotal roles in shaping the events leading up to the Russo-Japanese War. Emperor Meiji provided guidance and support for Japan's goals, while Prime Minister Taro Katsura was instrumental in formulating strategies to confront Russia. On the Russian side, Tsar Nicholas II oversaw his empire's foreign policy decisions. To understand why war became inevitable, it is also important to examine societal attitudes and cultural factors that influence Japanese and Russian perspectives on military aggression. Nationalistic sentiments, propaganda campaigns, and public opinion played significant roles in fueling support or opposition to the war effort in both countries. Japan's decision to challenge the Russian Empire in the Russo-Japanese War was driven by a number of reasons and motivations. One of the key factors was Japan's desire for territorial expansion, access to resources, and regional dominance. As Japan underwent rapid modernization during the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, it sought to assert itself as a major global power. On the other hand, Russia was motivated to maintain control over its territories in East Asia. It viewed its influence in the region as critical for securing its naval access to the Pacific Ocean. Additionally, maintaining a presence in Korea and Manchuria was seen as vital for protecting its economic and strategic interests. Diplomatic negotiations between Japan and Russia were initially pursued to prevent an armed conflict. Both sides discussed various proposals and concessions, but their divergent interests and mutual suspicions hampered any significant progress. Efforts at mediation by other countries, such as the United States, also failed to find a peaceful resolution. As diplomatic avenues faltered, military preparations began in earnest. Both Japan and Russia recognized the need to bolster their armed forces in anticipation of hostilities. Having invested heavily in modernizing its military, Japan was confident in its capabilities and resolved to take on Russia. Meanwhile, Russia underestimated Japan's preparedness and perceived it as an inferior adversary. The breakdown of negotiations and the subsequent military build-up by both powers ultimately led to the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War. The clash between these two nations would have far-reaching consequences for not only East Asia but also Europe. It marked the beginning of a new era in world history, one that would reshape the balance of power on both continents. In terms of military leaders, Japan was led by Field Marshal Count Yamagata Aratamo and Admiral Hidehiro Togo. Both men were highly respected for their strategic brilliance and played crucial roles in Japan's eventual victory. Yamagata Aratamo formulated a comprehensive military strategy that emphasized swift assaults and capturing key objectives. Admiral Togo, on the other hand, commanded Japan's naval forces and led them to several decisive victories over the Russian fleet. Russia's military leadership was less cohesive and efficient. Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, who commanded the Baltic Fleet, was an experienced officer but lacked the necessary training in modern naval tactics. His ill-fated attempt to sail the fleet from Europe to reinforce Russian forces in the Far East ended in disaster at the Battle of Tsushima. It is important to note that these key players were not the only influencers in the lead-up to the Russo-Japanese War. Various political factions, military officials, and diplomats from both sides contributed to the decision-making process. However, the individuals mentioned above had a substantial impact on shaping their respective nations' strategies and determining the outcome of the conflict. In these major battles, both sides exhibited their military expertise and employed various strategies to gain the upper hand. Key locations, such as Port Arthur and Mukden, became battlegrounds where fierce fighting ensued. Japanese commanders demonstrated their tactical brilliance by utilizing innovative approaches, including the effective use of artillery and infantry. The Russian forces, on the other hand, employed defensive tactics and relied heavily on their fortified positions. One of the most decisive battles in Manchuria was the Battle of Mukden, which lasted from February 20th to March 10th, 1905. The Japanese forces led a relentless assault against the Russian army, eventually pushing them back and securing a significant victory. The battle showcased Japan's superior military prowess and highlighted their ability to effectively coordinate ground forces. In addition to the battles on land, naval engagements in the Yellow Sea played a vital role in Japan's triumph. The clashes between the Japanese Navy and the Russian Baltic Fleet, especially the Battle of Tsushima, were pivotal moments in the war. The Japanese Navy utilized their technologically advanced vessels to devastating effect, sinking a majority of the Russian fleet. This victory further established Japan's dominance at sea and severely weakened Russia's ability to reinforce its troops in Manchuria. The Japanese Navy had superior naval vessels, including modern battleships armed with advanced weaponry such as heavy artillery and torpedoes. These technological advantages gave the Japanese Navy a significant edge over the Russian forces. One notable example of Japan's military strategy was the successful siege of Port Arthur. The Japanese forces meticulously planned their assault, conducting extensive reconnaissance missions and utilizing advanced intelligence gathering techniques. They identified weak points in the Russian defenses and strategically targeted them with precision. Additionally, they employed artillery bombardments to weaken enemy fortifications before launching a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. This multi-pronged approach caught the Russian defenders off guard and eventually led to Japan's capture of Port Arthur. Japan's success in the Russo-Japanese War can be attributed to a combination of factors: technological advancements, effective leadership, advanced intelligence gathering, and logistical support all played significant roles in shaping the outcomes of battles. By capitalizing on these advantages, Japan was able to outmaneuver and defeat the Russian forces, ultimately leading to their triumph in this pivotal conflict. Japan's victory had profound geopolitical implications both within East Asia and Europe. With their triumph, Japan emerged as a dominant force, reshaping power dynamics in East Asia and forcing other nations to adapt to the new realities. The dismantling of traditional alliances and the realignment of political interests marked a turning point in international relations. In Europe, Russia's defeat undermined its prestige and influence, leading to shifts in alliances and strategies among European nations, and to a new era in global international relations. The realization of Japan's military capabilities prompted European powers to engage in diplomatic dialogues, establish trade relations, and adapt their strategies to accommodate Japan's newfound influence. Although there were variations in responses across different countries, Europe recognized the significance of Japan's rise and its implications for global power dynamics.